perception shift. Why feeling trapped is the first illusion. The moment life feels rigged is usually the moment you stop thinking strategically. It doesn't arrive with warning. It settles quietly into your mind after enough disappointments, after enough moments where effort didn't seem to matter, after watching others move ahead while you stayed in place. You begin telling yourself that the system is unfair, that circumstances are stacked against you, that no matter what you do, the outcome feels predetermined. This is not reality speaking. This is emotional interpretation. Most people never separate the two. They feel frustrated, so they assume they are powerless. They experience resistance, so they decide the game is broken. But what's actually happening is something far more subtle. Their perception has narrowed. Their thinking has become reactive instead of observational. This is the first illusion. When you emotionally engage with circumstances, your awareness collapses inward. You stop noticing patterns. You stop reading timing. You stop observing how outcomes are created. You focus only on how things feel. And feelings are never neutral. They distort perspective. What most people miss is that systems don't defeat you. Misreading them does. Life operates on invisible rules. Social environments reward composure. Opportunities respond to positioning. Progress follows consistency. But when frustration dominates your inner world, these patterns become invisible. You fight the surface instead of understanding the structure beneath it. This creates emotional tension. You push harder. You complain more. You compare yourself constantly. And every reaction reinforces the belief that something external is controlling you. The psychological realization comes when you finally see that the system doesn't have power over you. Your interpretation of it does. The moment you decide life is rigged, you stop looking for leverage. You stop studying how influence works. You stop noticing who stays calm under pressure and who collapses emotionally. Strong minds don't argue with reality. They observe it. They don't waste energy fighting unfairness. They analyze it. They don't complain about obstacles. They learn how obstacles shape behavior. This is where perception begins to shift. Instead of asking why things are happening to you, you start asking how they work. Instead of emotionally reacting to outcomes, you examine cause and effect. You stop personalizing resistance and begin studying systems. This changes everything. You realize that most people broadcast weakness without knowing it. They reveal impatience through rushed decisions. They expose insecurity through constant explanation. They display emotional dependence through complaint. And because they operate this way, they become predictable. Predictability removes power. When you understand this, you stop participating in emotional chaos. You slow down. You observe interactions instead of absorbing them. You watch how people respond to pressure. You notice who keeps composure and who loses it. You begin seeing patterns that were invisible when you were emotionally invested. This awareness gives you space to think, space to choose, space to reposition. You stop reacting to unfairness and start analyzing it. You notice that those who succeed quietly don't move emotionally. They don't announce frustration. They don't broadcast struggle. They adjust strategy silently. They treat life like a system, not a story. This creates a mindset shift. You move from emotional frustration to observational awareness. You stop allowing disappointment to dictate direction. You stop assuming resistance means failure. You begin interpreting challenges as information. Information tells you where pressure exists. Information tells you where leverage lies. Information tells you how people behave under stress. Strong minds collect this data. They don't collapse into emotion. They detach and study. You start seeing that the game isn't about fairness. It's about positioning. It's about timing. It's about understanding incentives. Once you realize this, you stop waiting for life to become easier. You start becoming sharper. You learn to pause before reacting. You learn to read situations instead of rushing into them. You learn to observe how power flows through environments. And slowly, your identity begins to change. You stop seeing yourself as someone trapped by circumstances. You become someone who studies systems. You stop blaming outcomes. You analyze patterns. You stop needing emotional comfort. You seek clarity. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you precise. You still feel disappointment. You still experience frustration. But those emotions no longer control your behavior. They become signals instead of commands. You don't spiral when things feel unfair. You step back and look for structure. This is the beginning of strategic awareness. You stop moving blindly. You start moving deliberately. You realize that feeling trapped was never proof that life was rigged. It was proof that your perception was narrowed by emotion. Once that emotion loosens its grip, your vision widens. You see options. You see openings. You see leverage. You stop demanding fairness, you start creating advantage. And that is the moment you transition from reacting to reality to reading it. You become someone who studies patterns instead of blaming outcomes. You become someone who understands that perception shapes power. You become someone who no longer feels played by life, because you finally learned how to observe it instead of emotionally fighting it. And once you learn to master the space between impulse and action, you stop being controlled by emotional reactions and start moving with quiet precision. You become someone whose absence speaks louder than their effort. Strategic awareness, how strong minds read the room. Those who win quietly learn the rules before they try to change anything. Most people rush into situations emotionally. They react before observing. They speak before understanding. They move before reading the environment. And when outcomes don't go their way, they call it unfair. But what they missed was not opportunity. It was awareness. Strong minds don't enter rooms blindly. They scan. They listen. They measure energy. Every environment has a structure beneath it. Social hierarchies, unspoken expectations, power dynamic rhythms. Most people ignore these invisible layers because they are too focused on how things feel. They want fairness immediately. They want recognition instantly. They want change without studying the terrain. But influence doesn't come from force. It comes from positioning. What most people never realize is how much weakness is broadcast through impatience. When someone speaks too quickly, interrupts constantly, over-explains their ideas, or complains about outcomes, they reveal insecurity. Emotional leakage exposes internal instability, and in competitive or high-pressure environments, instability lowers perceived value. This is an unseen social pattern. People reward composure more than effort. Effort can be loud, composure is quiet. Effort is visible, composure is felt. When someone maintains emotional steadiness in uncertain situations, others instinctively assign them authority. Not because they are dominant, but because they appear controlled. Control signals competence. Emotional regulation signals strength. Strategic awareness begins when you stop reacting to unfairness and start analyzing it. Instead of asking why something happened, you ask how it happened. You look at incentives. You observe behavior. You notice who benefits from certain outcomes. You track patterns instead of defending ego. This shift is subtle but powerful. When life feels unfair, the emotional response is to resist, to argue, to demand correction. But strong minds pause. They detach from immediate reaction and gather information. They don't rush to defend themselves. They don't over-explain. They study. Studying creates leverage. Leverage doesn't require aggression. It requires clarity. When you read the room correctly, you understand timing. You know when to speak and when silence carries more weight. You know when to act and when waiting creates advantage. You recognize which battles are worth engaging and which ones drain energy. Most people exhaust themselves fighting the wrong conflicts. They respond to every slight. They argue every disagreement. They try to correct every misunderstanding. But strategic awareness teaches restraint. Not every situation deserves your reaction. Not every challenge deserves your attention. Sometimes, silence builds more influence than confrontation ever could. You begin to notice that environments reward those who adapt quickly. Adaptation doesn't mean losing identity. It means adjusting behavior based on information. It means recognizing when direct resistance will create friction and when subtle repositioning creates progress. This is psychological leverage. Instead of pushing against resistance, you flow around it. Instead of demanding recognition, you create results that force recognition. Instead of arguing your value, you demonstrate it through consistency. You stop broadcasting frustration. You start conserving energy. This changes how people perceive you. When you no longer complain about unfairness, you appear grounded. When you stop reacting emotionally, you appear stable. When you observe before speaking, your words carry more weight. Strong minds don't need to dominate conversations. They choose when to contribute. They understand that influence often comes from precision, not volume. This awareness also reshapes how you see obstacles. Instead of interpreting them as personal attacks, you interpret them as structural barriers. Structural barriers can be navigated. Emotional attacks feel overwhelming because they activate ego, but once you detach ego from outcome, clarity returns. You begin identifying patterns in how success moves through systems. You see that timing matters more than speed. You see that relationships often matter more than raw skill. You see that perception shapes opportunity as much as competence. Once you see these patterns, you stop feeling trapped. You stop thinking life is random. You stop believing the system is against you. You start understanding that systems reward awareness. This creates a mindset shift. You move from reacting to analyzing. You move from emotional intensity to deliberate observation. You move from frustration to precision. Your behavior slows down, but your thinking sharpens. You don't rush to make statements. You don't rush to prove points. You let others reveal themselves through behavior. This gives you clarity without confrontation, and clarity creates confidence, not loud confidence, measured confidence, the kind that doesn't need validation. You begin trusting your ability to read situations. You understand that influence isn't about overpowering others. It's about positioning yourself where outcomes favor you. You become intentional with energy. You speak when it adds weight. You stay silent when it protects power. You act when timing aligns. You wait when impatience would cost you. This identity shift is profound. You stop being someone who fights the system emotionally. You become someone who navigates it strategically. You stop demanding fairness. You start creating advantage. You stop moving impulsively. You start moving deliberately. Internal disciplines. Why control beats talent. The urge to complain is stronger than the urge to adapt. This is where most people quietly lose. They don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they let emotion lead before structure takes over. When pressure appears, their first instinct is to express frustration. When things feel unfair, they look outward for someone to blame. When progress slows, they seek comfort instead of correction. Talent feels powerful in the beginning. Discipline feels uncomfortable. That's why most people rely on talent, and that's also why most people plateau. Internal discipline starts where emotional comfort ends. It begins when you stop asking how things should feel and start asking how things actually work. It's the moment you realize that intensity without control creates chaos, and chaos never produces long-term results. Strong minds don't overpower life with emotion. They regulate themselves inside it. This is the hidden advantage most people overlook. Emotional restraint reshapes how pressure affects your decisions. When you remain calm under stress, your thinking stays sharp. When you detach from frustration, your perception widens. When you stop reacting impulsively, you regain command over your choices. Most people allow emotion to hijack behavior. They respond immediately. They vent. They defend. They explain. Every reaction feels justified in the moment, but each one quietly trains their nervous system to associate discomfort with impulsive action. Over time, this creates instability. They become predictable, easily triggered, easily pulled off course. Internal discipline interrupts this pattern. You feel the urge to complain, but you don't. You notice irritation, but you stay silent. You experience resistance, but you pause instead of pushing emotionally. This is not suppression. This is mastery. You allow emotion to exist without letting it steer. That separation is everything. It teaches your body that discomfort does not require escape. It teaches your mind that pressure does not require reaction. Slowly, you become less reactive and more intentional. Your responses slow down. Your decisions become cleaner. This is emotional control in its purest form. You stop giving your energy to every inconvenience. You stop dramatizing obstacles. You stop allowing minor setbacks to dominate your mental space. Instead, you focus on structure. Structure replaces chaos. Structure replaces complaint. Structure replaces emotional volatility. You build routines that don't depend on motivation. You create habits that function even when you feel tired or discouraged. You stop waiting to feel ready. You move because movement itself creates clarity. This creates mental boundaries. You draw a line between how you feel and what you do. You stop letting mood decide action. You stop allowing temporary frustration to rewrite long-term goals. These boundaries protect your direction. They prevent emotional detours. They keep you grounded when circumstances fluctuate. Most people don't realize how much energy they lose to emotional noise. They replay conversations. They imagine rejection. They dwell on unfairness. All of that drains focus. Internal discipline pulls attention back to what matters. You stop carrying what you cannot control. You start strengthening what you can. This is where psychological transformation begins. You move from chaos-driven behavior to structure-driven behavior. You stop reacting to life and start shaping it. You become less concerned with how things appear and more focused on how they function. You also become harder to manipulate. Because emotional control removes leverage, people can only influence you when they can provoke you. When you no longer respond emotionally, their power fades. You don't rise to bait. You don't engage in unnecessary conflict. You don't chase validation. You remain steady. Steadiness changes everything. Your presence becomes calmer. Your voice becomes slower. Your decisions become deliberate. People notice that you don't rush, that you don't explain yourself excessively, that you don't emotionally lean into situations. This creates quiet authority. Not because you dominate, Because you regulate. You begin trusting your own stability more than external reassurance. You don't need others to confirm your direction. You don't need constant feedback. You rely on internal alignment. That alignment becomes your compass. You stop measuring progress emotionally. You measure it structurally. Are you consistent? Are you improving? Are you adapting? These questions replace frustration. Over time, this reshapes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who needs motivation. You become someone who moves regardless. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You operate inside imperfect ones. You stop hoping pressure disappears. You learn to function within it. This is why control beats talent. Talent fades under stress, control sharpens. Talent seeks comfort, control seeks precision. Talent reacts, control responds. Most people admire talent, few understand discipline. But discipline is what allows talent to survive pressure. Discipline is what keeps direction stable when emotions fluctuate. And once you embody this, your entire relationship with difficulty changes. Obstacles stop feeling personal. Resistance becomes information. Delay becomes part of the process. You don't spiral. You adjust. You conserve energy. You protect focus. You stay aligned. You don't argue with reality. You adapt to it. You don't fight circumstances emotionally. You study them. You don't collapse under pressure. You become clearer inside it. This is internal discipline, not harshness, not rigidity. Precision. Quiet authority, playing differently without needing approval. Imagine reaching a point where life no longer feels like something happening to you. Instead, it feels like something you move through with intention. This is what the future version of you looks like once emotional attachment stops controlling your decisions. You don't rush to explain yourself. You don't feel pressured to prove anything. You don't chase recognition. Your presence becomes grounded, contained, and deliberate. Most people live externally. They look for signals before they act. They wait for encouragement before committing. They measure their worth through reactions. Their nervous systems stay activated because they are constantly scanning for feedback. A message, a compliment, a sign of approval. These become emotional checkpoints. When they receive them, they feel confident. When they don't, doubt creeps in. This creates instability. Quiet authority begins when you step out of that loop. You stop organizing your behavior around other people's responses. You stop needing confirmation to move forward. You stop interpreting silence as rejection. Instead, you begin operating from internal alignment. This shift is subtle. It doesn't arrive with dramatic confidence. It shows up in small changes. You speak less. You listen more. You pause before responding. You don't rush decisions. You don't emotionally lean into conversations. You allow moments to breathe. And slowly your energy changes. Your body language becomes calmer. Your voice becomes steadier. Your reactions become measured. People feel this before they understand it. This is inner authority. Inner authority is not dominance. It's self-command. It's knowing that your emotional state belongs to you. You don't outsource stability to circumstances. You don't let other people's moods dictate your peace. You don't allow uncertainty to collapse your center. You become internally regulated. You also become selective with attention. Attention is power. Wherever it goes, your energy follows. Most people give attention away freely. They replay conversations. They absorb criticism. They imagine rejection. Their minds become crowded. Their focus becomes fragmented. You begin pulling your attention inward. You protect it. You decide what deserves access. This creates psychological distance, not cold distance, intentional distance. You stop managing other people's emotions. You stop trying to control outcomes. You stop filling silence just because it feels uncomfortable. You allow space. Space reveals everything. It shows who respects boundaries. It shows who only engages when they feel pursued. It shows who values presence versus who valued availability. Detachment sharpens perception. Without emotional noise clouding your judgment, you see patterns clearly. You notice how often you used to over-give. You recognize where you sought approval. You understand how much energy you once spent trying to be understood. That awareness changes how you move. You stop chasing connection. You stop proving value. You stop explaining your direction. You let your actions speak. Your confidence becomes quieter. Your discipline becomes visible through consistency. Your strength becomes internal. People begin adjusting around you. Conversations change. Dynamics shift. You don't demand respect. Your composure creates it. You don't assert dominance. Your calm communicates control. This is long-term power, not emotional leverage, not situational influence. Sustained inner alignment. You don't rush success. You don't dramatize setbacks. You don't inflate wins. You remain centered. That center becomes your foundation. You become harder to manipulate because you don't react emotionally. Harder to destabilize because you don't depend on approval. Harder to ignore because your energy is no longer scattered. You don't give explanations when misunderstood. You don't argue for validation. You don't compete for attention. You let people come toward you. And when they don't, you remain steady. This is identity consolidation. You are no longer someone who seeks reassurance. You are someone who trusts their own stability. You are no longer someone who waits for belief. You are someone who moves regardless. You are no longer someone who needs emotional confirmation. You are someone who generates internal certainty. You stop asking whether you're allowed to take space in the world. You take it. You stop wondering if timing is right. You act. You stop waiting for others to recognize your worth. You recognize it yourself. Life stops feeling rigged when you stop playing emotionally. You stop reacting to circumstances. You start positioning yourself inside them. You stop asking for fairness. You build leverage. You stop moving impulsively. You move deliberately. You stop letting chaos shape your identity. You shape yourself within chaos. And at some point, you realize that strong minds don't escape the game. They learn how to play it differently, quietly, internally, without needing approval, because power was never about controlling the world. It was always about mastering yourself. And when precision replaces emotional chaos, you stop being controlled by circumstance and start moving through life with quiet strength, because you are no longer driven by impulse, but guided by structure and awareness. And once you learn to read the room instead of reacting to it, life stops feeling chaotic and begins to feel navigable, because you're no longer playing blindly. You're observing, positioning, and choosing with awareness.